It is so hard, and so many people are coming together to make this happen. And we're watching. We have to be there with them.
Stage one. Flight.
T-minus 15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon. Go NASA, go SpaceX, Godspeed, Bob and Doug.
Godspeed indeed.
Vehicle pitching downrange.
Emotional moment for you right now, Katie, watching.
Stage one propulsion is nominal.
People on the ground will hear that.
Falcon power and timing nominal. And 1D throttle down.
Katie and Christina, as we watch this, I'm thinking about what Bob Behnken told his family just before they left. Let's light that candle, because you see that big, beautiful rocket, clear blue skies, and just headed straight on its mission.
And 1D throttle up.
Hope triumphs over fear in a time where our country needs it. Needs to be reminded of that.
And down on the ground, they can actually feel. You can physically feel that crackling that we hear. You can physically feel that.
Our Gio Benitez is at the Kennedy Space Center right now. Behind him is where the rocket just took off from. And Gio, what are your thoughts? I mean, you were right there. You could feel it. You could hear it. Walk us through.
Start of MVAC engine chill.
Well, I just have to tell you, I'm emotional right now because this is such a moment. And to feel what Katie was talking about, feeling that moment, feeling that go up into the air, and you can still sort of feel it. Extraordinary human achievement right here. And sorry for getting emotional, but it's my first launch, so there's that.
And Christina,
Wow.
not at all your first launch. What are your thoughts as you're watching this historic moment?
I just couldn't be more thrilled. I'm thinking about how Bob and Doug feel in there and how excited they are. You know, every moment of the day was mostly the same as what they had experienced in their training sims until that takes off and you know you're going up. And at this point, they've been going up for so long, they know they're not stopping till they're in space. And that is just an incredible feeling. It's a new era where space travel isn't just limited to sovereign countries and governments. It's something that's going to be accessible for all, and it's going to be an innovative thing where we just open it up, and I can't wait to see where we go with it.
Confirmed.
There's first stage set.
MVAC ignition.
Katie, talk to us about what we're just watching right here. We know this is a sort of a critical moment.
So that's the first stage dropping away. We call it main engine cutoff.
And explain to us exactly what's happening.
So basically the first stage, the first giant piece, we've used all that gas and now we're kicking it off. It's actually going to fly itself back down to the recovery ship. It goes up for another long time and then comes back down, but we'll see all that within the next few minutes.
And that was a major part of SpaceX's program, the reusable rockets.
Absolutely.
To make this, I don't want to say affordable, but to make it cost effective.
Exactly, to be able to reuse them again. And actually what they learn and making sure they understand how to make them fly back has been immense.
And Elon Musk had referred to that as part of the holy grail of spaceflight, essentially saying, why would you throw away a 747 every time that you used it? Give us a sense of what happens now. It'll not be until tomorrow. Is that in the morning or the afternoon when it's expected to dock with the International Space Station?
So this is the Dragon itself is still powering up into space. So it's still on the second stage engine right now.
Nominal trajectory.
Nominal trajectory, I'm hearing. And so,
Signal Bermuda.
And what does that mean, what we're hearing right now?
they're saying when the next abort site is. Like, so all the way up from North Carolina, basically Nova Scotia, over to Ireland, there are abort points. There are designated points that if something goes wrong, that will be the place. And there are
where the Dragon capsule can come off.
Exactly.
Stage 2 propulsion is still nominal.
And that particular abort that's available here actually made this less risky than the initial NASA space shuttle flights.
I don't know about the numbers, but it's really it's extremely valuable to have this kind of abort capability, not interrupted by, oh, if it happens at this time, we couldn't quite abort. They have abort capability that 50 different abort sites all the way from the Cape and from the time before they fuel. From that time, that capsule could be pulled off of the rocket and Bob and Doug would land in the water. And now it's just a question of if that should happen, where.
SpaceX nominal trajectory.
Christina, talk to me about what Bob and Doug are doing right now inside the capsule. We can see them there on the left hand of the screen. What are they reviewing and what are they doing at this moment?
You know, at this moment, it's really just all about the rocket. So they are probably reviewing some of the pressures and different signals that they're getting in telemetry from the rocket itself. Like Katie said, they are on the second stage, so they're going to continue to be propelled into space up until 8 or so minutes into the total flight. So they're monitoring, but monitoring isn't as simple as just looking at a couple gauges. You know, everything is vibrating. They're having a lot of G-forces on them. So even just monitoring the systems and listening to the communications is a big job as test pilots that they're doing.
You know, I'm going to ask our director, Dave DeCinti, if he can, by chance, go back to the initial liftoff when the rocket took off, when it was a go. And I want to bring him back, Colonel Steve Ganyard. Steve, your friend is Doug Hurley. He's in that capsule right now. He is headed for the cosmos. I understand when you saw the rocket take off, it was a pretty emotional moment for you as well.
It was. You know, with like Geo, it's hard not to be overwhelmed by this triumph. The number of people that came together to make this happen, and for the U.S. to be going back to space, and to think about this in the broader context of what it means for humankind to be able to go out and truly colonize, to bring in this golden age of space exploration that these guys are laying the foundation for.
Your friend Doug Hurley, I mean, he is an astronaut, like the other astronauts we have joining us on this broadcast. He is somebody who's dedicated his life to this, and it is not an easy life. It is glamorous for the launches, but it is a very difficult life, and your family has to make a lot of sacrifices. Talk to us about Doug a little bit.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that just everybody would like. If you met him in a bar, he's the guy who's not too loud but loud enough where you want to hear his stories, and he's the kind of guy that anybody would love to be like, that people would want their sons and daughters to grow up like, and so he's a great role model, and I think Bob is too from what I've heard from him. So that's part of how NASA selects its astronauts. They're not only highly capable and willing to face the dangers of traveling in space, but they're also just great people, and they're people who can help the rest of the world understand science and to appreciate the kind of science and engineering that's going into space exploration. So he's a great ambassador for NASA, as is Bob, and it's a great thing to watch.
And Steve, I got to ask you though, the nickname, Doug's nickname, you mentioned it earlier, and the story behind that.
I'll give you a hint. Anybody that saw Wayne's World, maybe you can think back to that, but Doug and I have sort of a mutually assured destruction. We won't talk about our personal call signs together on TV. So.
All right, Colonel Steve Ganyard for us.
And I want to bring the astronauts back in. You know, just in his State of the Union address, President Trump in February said how necessary it is for the U.S. to be the first country to be able to plant its flag on Mars. Why is space exploration still so worth it? Not from a financial perspective, but from your perspective as astronauts.
Why is it?
Space exploration. Why is that so important? And you know, why would President Trump say it's so important, for example, for the United States to be the first country to plant their flag on Mars?
It's about people. And people, I mean, having gone to space, I always thought that space was somewhere else. And then once you get there, you realize that Earth is just bigger than you thought. Home is bigger than we thought. And our place is this universe. And exploring further and further and further is what we do. It will be individual countries that lead this, and yet we will be doing it together.
And Christina, wanted to bring you back in as well. It seemed like you wanted to answer that question. Also, you can do that. Also, I'm curious, just to give us a sense for most of us who have never been on the International Space Station, what they're about to be greeted by.
Well, it's an amazing feeling when you come through that hatch, because the first thing you see is the face of someone that you trust, a crew member who you know has got your back. And finally, after being, in a small capsule in the blackness of space on your way there for many, many hours, and in their case, almost 20 hours, they know they're home and they know that they're going to be well taken care of. And, you start right away learning how to live this new life in microgravity on board a space station, carrying out your tasks and duties. And so it'll be interesting to see them make that shift from kind of test pilots to being in it for the long haul. And I know they're going to do an awesome job.
Katie, you wanted to make a point here, too.
I was just hearing some awesome words, nominal orbital insertion.
What does that mean?
It means that they've gotten to space and they're in orbit.
All right, so that is a major moment here. They have entered space. If you've been watching the broadcast on the right hand of the screen, we are getting feeds in from SpaceX and from NASA. What we just saw right there, I don't know if the moment just happened, but it looks like the rocket booster just re-landed, right?
That was the booster.
That was the booster. That's incredible. It just launched into space and it just came down, and that was also a successful landing onto the ship because just before that it wasn't there.
And I'm going to correct here that I think they were calling that they're looking at a nominal orbital insertion.
Okay.
Because in 1 minute, less than 1 minute from now, we're talking about separation. Explain to us what that process is.
So that means that we're actually going to be done using the second stage, and Dragon will actually separate.
We have a very, it's a nice model, but I'm saying this is basic. It's not a Skywalker Ranch right here. But you have the Falcon rocket here, and you have the Dragon capsule, and this essentially comes off, and it takes off from there.
Exactly.
And Doug and Bob aren't here, and they're going from here straight to the space station.
That's correct.
And this is not that large, right? The capsule itself is not that large.
It's larger than what you think of for, Apollo, Gemini, but it's a small place, but it can seat 4. They've got 2 people in it. And the bottom part of that is actually going to stick with it, but they're actually living in the top sort of more triangular part there.
And it's a throwback to the older missions, right? The bringing back of the capsule, if you will.
Physics doesn't change.
Right.
Curious to get both of your perspectives. Christina, if you'll jump in here too. What you love most about being in space? What you love most about this moment that they're feeling right now and beyond?
Well, the thing I love most personally throughout my mission was being able to contribute and give back. It's something I've held in such high regard my entire life. So to be able to actually work on it day in and day out was just such a privilege. The moment that they're in right now is unforgettable. They're floating out of their seats a little bit for the first time. They're in microgravity. Of course, they've experienced that before, but for me, it was my first time. And I looked over at my crewmate, Nick Hague, who was also a rookie at it, and we smiled at each other and we knew we had gotten there. It's also maybe their first time to take a peek out the window, if they have access to that, to see Earth, which is another just phenomenal moment. But probably for a little while, they're going to be monitoring those systems. This is a big checkout period where they're making sure comm, navigation, and all that is working as expected. So despite that, they're pretty happy.
Okay, let's listen in.
Dragon separation confirmed.
Separation confirmed. Big smiles from both of you here.
Countdown 1 is emerged.
This is an incredible moment right here. SpaceX, 2 astronauts, a private company with NASA. I know we are still very far from mission accomplished, but so far where we are right now in this part of the mission, incredible.
This is the safest place. If you're not down here on Earth, this is the safest place to be.
Dragon, Chief Engineer on Dragon to Ground. Bob Doug, on behalf of the entire launch team, thanks for flying with Falcon 9 today. We hope you enjoyed the ride and wish you a great mission.
And we won't be able to hear from you.
Congratulations to you and the F9 team for the first human ride for Falcon 9, and it was incredible. Appreciate all the hard work. Thanks for the great ride to space.
That'll be all.
I'd like to be proud of you guys and the rest of the team. Thank you so much for what you've done for us today, putting America back into low Earth orbit from the Florida coast.
That'll be all. Good luck and Godspeed.
Godspeed. So next, they're going to stay for a minimum of 1 month, a maximum of just over 100 days. Give us a sense of what the mission is now.
Right now, they're getting ready for the rendezvous. So tomorrow is when they dock. I tell people 8.5 minutes to get to space and about a day and a half or so to parallel park, right? So they're going to approach the space station. And before they do that, or while they're doing that, we're actually really, this is still a test mission. Every single minute of it is a test mission, and they've got some well thought out tests to understand, does this vehicle behave like we thought it would? Can everybody have the right information at the right time? and does everything look good for docking? So there's a now and tomorrow morning when they will actually dock with the space station. And it's kind of like a ballet up in space. They'll be sort of like catching up with the space station. They're in orbit a little lower than the space station, and so they go around a little faster, and then they will actually do a burn to catch up with the station. And that ballet happens over the next 19 hours.
Christina, talk to us about Doug and Bob right now inside of that capsule. Are they navigating the capsule, or essentially is it on autopilot, being controlled, and they're sort of worrying about everything else?
It should be on autopilot. One thing about the SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule is that it could be completely automated throughout the mission, including rendezvous and docking. And it is the first of its kind to actually do that. Now, they do have the ability to take over manually, and because this is a test mission, they're actually going to practice that ability and test it out both near and far from the International Space Station. So they're not necessarily driving, but they're paying very close attention to how those automated systems are responding. As you can imagine, when it just pops off of the end of the rocket, there's no guaranteed orientation or attitude. It has to use all of its systems to figure out where it is in space, how it's oriented in space, and make sure that it's, belly down and nose forward going around the Earth. And so Bob and Doug are making sure that all those systems are working great. They're ready to react in the case that anything doesn't go as expected. And hopefully they're just watching all those systems come online nominally, even including the life support systems. They're in a closed loop life support system situation right now. Everything just went through a lot of vibrations on launch. So hopefully they're just watching everything come up nominally.
We actually also have that moment we spoke about earlier, the reusable rocket that we heard you mention. It landed back on a ship at sea, and we have the video. We want to show that to you now because this was one of the sort of the selling points for NASA and SpaceX. They promised they could do this. It took them a while, but they figured it out. And I think we do have that clip if Dave DeCinti can show it to us now. This was just the moment right after it landed back on that ship. And you can still see some of the thrusters there as we see some of the smoke come off the bottom of the rocket. But an incredible moment, an incredible technology. And Katie, as you watch this, does SpaceX impress you more and more as you've sort of seen their journey from once they got into the space race and what we've seen today?
Absolutely. I mean, I love that they bring things that are new ways of thinking, new ways of doing, and they and the NASA team have figured out a way to work on this together, which takes, I think, being brave enough to say this is what we see, this is what we can do, and NASA going, well, that is a different way, and vice versa. And so it's a pretty cool partnership, and yet it actually other partnerships as well.
And Steve Ganyard, wanted to bring you back in just to get a sense of what that partnership means, and was it necessary, in your opinion, for spaceflight to reinvent itself for the 21st century?
Yeah, I think if Elon Musk were with us right now, he would tell you that SpaceX has stood on the shoulders of NASA. And to Katie's point previously, this is a public-private partnership. So you're taking the best of government and the best of the private sector, and together, that's the triumph here today. This is the triumph that's going to drive the cost, increase the safety, reliable launch to orbit that's going to allow us to put colonies on other planets. So to do that, we required the best from the private sector, the best from the government, and that's how we got to this launch today, and that's what the future will be.
And give us a sense just again of why NASA is no longer launching astronauts itself. I mean, why involve private funds?
Yeah, government. If we look at the COVID response, right, not great. So if we leave things exclusively to government, they aren't as agile. If you go to the private sector, they're faster, quicker, better, cheaper. But you need government in something like this, where big science, very expensive big science is involved. And so this partnership between NASA and SpaceX, and in the future, there's lots of other companies that are involved here. It's not just SpaceX. We have Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin coming along here. He's nipping at the heels of Elon Musk. And Jeff Bezos is spending $1 billion with a B of his own money to get to the moon. And you have these competing visions where Elon Musk wants to go and put a colony on Mars, and Jeff Bezos wants a colony on the moon. And so you have these two entrepreneurs, the richest guy in the world and the 31st richest guy in the world, who are putting their own money down to secure a personal legacy, to secure a personal dream that most of the rest of the world shares. And that is to get to space and create colonies and explore new worlds and advance science.
Rewatching that launch, it just does not get old. But Katie, you wanted to comment.
Well, I think with all these companies, and the partnerships with government. I mean, government has the public trust. I mean, we are the shepherds of the taxpayers' dollars. And then you have these innovative companies who can actually take bigger risks, not with people, but with hardware. And by them being able to say, well, let's try it this way, something that would be a little bit harder for the less flexible bureaucracy of the U.S. To do. By doing that, they actually go several steps ahead, and it brings everybody with them. And that's the general principle that we're using to basically get to Mars faster.
How has the marriage been, though? Because you do really have sort of two very different spouses in NASA and Elon Musk. You know, right? Yeah. I mean, how has this marriage worked, and what is the real story? I mean, results matter. There are results right now. We're watching them up close. But how has that been? Because you have the rebel billionaire and you have the by-the-book agency.
Well, I like to look at even what we've seen in the press conferences, the way these people talk to each other. You can tell that they have figured themselves out. You know, that they have figured out how to forge relationships. And part of it is, I think, that the mission is the same. The mission is to explore and to go further and to build the hardware and make sure that basically, you know, a diverse bunch of people can get to go and not just a few. And I think when they focus on that, I mean, I see the bridges in between individual disciplines, and even, I mean, they're watching movies together during the quarantine. They had the flight control team, SpaceX and NASA were watching. I call them boy movies. I think there's a show, Bob and Doug McKenzie. I think that was a favorite.
Christina, curious if we can just like kind of piggyback on that. Your thoughts on space tourism and the idea of, should space just be open for people who have experience, or come one and all?
So they're going to continue under the power of this.
I am definitely in the come one and all camp, and I think that that's the prevailing theory right now. You know, NASA's job was to incubate this until it was ready for release into the private sector, until it was commercially viable, and that's when it's better to hand it off to companies like SpaceX, so that NASA can set its sights on parts of this may not quite yet be commercially viable, and get them to those points. That's things like going back to them this decade and eventually on to Mars. So I say anyone who's curious, anyone who has a desire to dream, to carry humanity's dreams with them into space and to share it when they get back, to contribute to the science on, I welcome them, and that's why this era that we're starting today is so exciting.
And Katie, we talked about that they won't actually attach to the International Space Station until tomorrow. How long is this portion of the flight?
This portion, meaning until they get to the space station?
Right.
It's, I think 19 hours is the total. And so they're going to actually get a chance once they're doing a lot of things right now, checking out things. As Christina was saying, there's a lot of shaking that goes on. You want to make sure everything's still in good shape. But after they're done with a bunch of tests, they'll probably take their suits off. They've got food up there. There's enough room to move around. Eventually, the astronauts will go to bed.
So you will sleep. So, I mean, Tom actually brought this up about, is this kind of riding itself at a certain point on autopilot, but they'll both go to sleep at the same time, or it's one person is always...
Someone's on watch.
Yeah.
Well, as I understand it, the plan is to sleep at the same time. I mean, there's a timeline that says you'll sleep, and actually being ready for that critical, I'm being funny about it, but being ready for that critical operation of docking is imperative. And they've had a long day. And so when sleep's your job, that's what you'll do. And at the same time, they've got alarms inside the vehicle there. I'm sure they're going to be watching, but the ground is watching them as well.
You know, Christina, I know you set the record for the longest time in the space station by a woman, nearly a year. Incredible. And one of the research projects you worked on was what sort of being in space that long does to the human body. What did you figure out? What did you learn? And why on this mission with Doug and Bob is there sort of a sliding scale? It could be a few months or it could be 110 days. Explain that.
Sure. Well, some of the things that we're looking to find out is what is normal for the human body after up to a year in space, and hopefully longer eventually as we're looking to architectures for Mars missions. But I think what we find is what things sort of plateau in terms of your physiological changes, and what things maybe keep getting different and keep adapting that we have to maybe watch and come up with new countermeasures for. Our exercise program is excellent, so we keep that cardiovascular and muscular health going, but there are always new things to learn when we extend those missions. For Bob and Doug, I think there are a couple different factors that affect when they can come home. One is the readiness of the next vehicle. It's obviously still going through some of its final, phases of its construction and delivery, so we'll see how that pans out. Obviously, right now the goal is late August, I believe. And then also things like, are the solar arrays going to perform better or worse than expected? That could change its maximum possible duration. There's operational requirements requirements and constraints. Are they going to do some spacewalks, get some new batteries installed? And then simply weather. You know, when they come home, there's a lot more weather sites to check for all the different possible landing sites. So there's kind of a few different factors that we're playing. And what I love is that NASA is nimble enough to play with those factors and recognize we don't have to pin it down right now. We can be flexible and nimble. And to see that developing as we work with our private partners is pretty exciting.
And Katie, wanted to bring back the point that Doug and Bob are both dads, and you had a 10-year-old son, and who's now 19, but you were still able to communicate with him every night. I mean, give us a sense of the regimen and how you're able to stay in contact with home.
With the same kind of way we can actually see the astronauts right now and talk to them, we can actually call our families for, at least 40 minutes of every hour if we wanted to, if you could, all day long, which nobody has time for that. But I spoke to my family every day except for 3 in almost 6 months. And so we get to talk to them. We used to have video conferences once a month, once a week. It might be a little bit better than that. But you find ways to be in touch and be together. My son and I used to read stories.
I think we have some video. You brought your flute up with you into space. And in a moment, we're gonna play that. There we go. The first ever duet from space and on the ground. Tell us about this moment.
This is with Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull, and I loved the fact that he brought the flute to rock music, and he sort of brought a whole bunch of people with him, including me. And so I wrote to him and just said, I'm going to go to the space station on a little business trip, and I wonder if I could take your flute with me. On the day on the day of this duet, he was in Perm, Russia, playing a concert. It was the April 12th, 2011, the 50th anniversary of human spaceflight. He was in Russia. I was living on the space station, and we played this duet together.
Well, it's definitely different, but nonetheless, incredibly cool. And I gotta think, even though you have a whole nation behind you and rooting you on in space, at moments it has to get so lonely, and you do have to cut loose and whip out the jazz flute and just go wild, right? I mean, after you're up there for so long.
Well, the big secret is that people feel badly for us, and they have these images of capsule, but that space station is like 10 school buses without the seats in them, all connected together at different angles. I mean, it's huge and giant. It's filled with science experiments that can't be done down here, and it's the most amazing place to live. I would have stayed another 6 months in a minute.
I'd like to bring Gio Benitez back in. And Gio, it's quite a different scene than it would be outside of a pandemic. Certainly you would have many people who are watching. Give us a sense of what you are observing there from on the ground, and if you're able to kind of give us a read on the energy there.
People were just so excited, Lindsay, just so excited. They've cleared out, but this whole lawn here was packed with people as people were just watching this launch. By the way, I got to just say, Katie and Christina, they're incredibly modest, but you know how they tell us, oh, you should know a little bit about everything? Well, astronauts need to know a lot about everything. They are just the smartest people that I've interviewed so far, because they go in with some expertise, and then they have to know a little bit about everything, including how to do their own surgery, because they're obviously alone. They're on that ship, on that International Space Station. By the way, I should tell you that tomorrow morning, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, that is when they are expected to dock at the ISS, and at 12:45 p.m. Eastern, that is when they are going to do that hatch opening into the International Space Station, and that's where they have the welcome ceremony.
Gio, could you sense the pressure from speaking with so many NASA staffers and being in those news conferences? Could you sense the pressure that, all eyes were on this launch? It had to be a successful mission for a variety of reasons, of course, because we had 2 Americans aboard the capsule, but also just to push forward the space program in America, because there are some very ambitious projects down the road.
Incredibly ambitious projects. We are talking about, I spoke with the NASA administrator, and he said that one of the projects he's most excited about is the idea of 3D printing organs. Can you imagine what that would mean for healthcare? That is something that you could do in the microgravity of space that you can't necessarily do here on Earth. So no doubt about it, they wanted this to succeed, and they wanted to make sure, though, that Bob and Doug were both safe as they did it.
And curious if you're aware of this story, Katie, you probably we are. I guess there was an American flag that flew on the first ever space shuttle. Tell us about that, because now it sounds like there was a race rab, like who was going to bring it back? Was it going to be SpaceX? Or
Exactly. So on our last shuttle flight, that flag actually went up to the space station and Doug did. Doug and his commander, Chris Ferguson, who is the commander of the Boeing launch that will be coming soon, right? And so here's the commander and pilot vying for whose spacecraft, commercial partner spacecraft, will be up there first to then retrieve that flag and bring it back home.
SpaceX.
So I guess that, well, you know, you don't like to say it's done till it's done, but it's looking pretty good for SpaceX.
I want to ask Christina, you know, we're talking about docking with the International Space Station aboard a private rocket ship and a private spaceship.